cabeça, como quem se eu estivesse conversando comigo mesmo. Então eu amo, eu adoro o meu trabalho. Quando eu estou pintando, é como quem se eu estivesse dando tudo de mim. Por quê? Porque eu amo. Sinto prazer em fazer o trabalho de meus filhos, de minhas filhas, que são minhas imagens. As imagens, para mim, são obras.
Every community in the world has, as a result of its social interactions, a kind of agreement on what is beautiful. In every community, there are people who are born with a desire to get a grip on that aesthetic grammar and make stuff. Josalvo, when he was a little boy, his mother took him to the Church of Our Lady of the Conception in downtown Marigujipino. She thought he was stunned by religious fervor. He wasn't. He said, how in the world can anybody make something like that? It's just amazing to me. It's beautiful to me. Our friend Ejival Hosas thought exactly the same thing in Serra, way to the north of where we are now. He went to church and his mom thought, oh, what a religious little boy. Maybe he'll grow up to be a priest. Not a priest at all. He grew up to be an artist. Because he looked at that sculpture and he just couldn't believe how beautiful it was, how magnificent it was. Ejival says, when I was a little boy, I felt an electric current driving in me. That electric current wasn't for God. That electric current was for art. In Brazil, they say it starts with a dom, a gift from God. Whether you talk about it as a gift from God, or whether you talk about it as innate talent, or whether you talk about it as just the human spirit on fire, the fact is people who want to make art search around them for models. I don't think that the inner drive of the artist is different. It's the circumstantial set that's different. I stand with people and study the things that they create. That's what interests me. What do they choose to present to me as emblems of their being? Lady Gregory, a great folklorist from the past in Ireland, said that field work is based on two things: reverence and patience. And that's exactly right. I'm patient with the people that I work with, and I'm reverent toward them. Space is the dimension of completeness, and time is the dimension of exclusion. So you can tell a temporal story and exclude almost everybody in the world. In other words, if you don't have space, you can leave women out, or kids out, or old people out. But if you're really attentive to the spatial dimension, everybody gets in. And so I begin in space. I begin with maps. Map out places, and then you understand that there are things that you would ignore if you just walked, because your mind will cause you to attach yourself to the kind of things you've previously been interested in. But if you make a good map, that map turns your attention to space, and you realize that you've got to include everything that's in that space. And so you're paying attention to everybody. Here's the place, here's the kind of houses people live in, here's the sort of fields that surround them. The fact is, I have a set of protocols. that really begin with maps and end with intimacy. The Turkish artist says, art is a matter of aşk. Aşk is passion. And what my passion does is it drives me to the level of creation that I understand that I can never reach. It's the passion of the reed that's ripped out of the riverbank and made into a flute, and you play the music of the flute, and it's the cry of the reed wishing to be back on the bank. There's a kind of an anxiety, there's a passion, and so that love, that aşk, that is the ultimate defining trait of what art is. In fact, the Turks will say, you'll never actually achieve it. It's a yearning. What art is the consequence of a yearning towards an impossibility. Born into an environment. That environment is made of a near infinity of interlocked traditions. We could never pick them apart and understand them. The way that Turks talk about tradition is that you're born into an air. The air is redolent with that tradition. You breathe it in. Inevitably you breathe it in. Every picture you see, every tune you hear, every experience that you have is providing you with influence. There is no escaping influence. There's only influence. So the wise artist chooses those influences. Representation. It doesn't have any reference. It's like an abstracting argument that takes all the qualities that you would normally think of as belonging to art, but strips away reference and just makes something that is pure form and pure color. Form and color like the forms of mountains, like the color of flowers. So all of nature has been abstracted into an essay on the nature of nature itself. And nature is about form and color. What I understood was the profound sincerity of what he committed in working with ceramics. There was nothing in between him and the job. It was pure commitment, pure giving. He gave himself into the material and received from the material the sign that he existed in the world. Every one of us is alone. Every one of us is in isolation. Every one of us is also together with other people, members of society. That particular complexity is what I think is the basis of art. That is, all of us are individuals, and therefore we'd better do things that recognize, that acknowledge, that respond to our individuality. At the very same time, all of us are members of society. All of us carry culture. All of us are social beings. And so that I think that art is ultimately a devoted reconciliation between the individual nature that all of us have and the collective nature that all of us have. At some point there needs to be a coming together of what I am as an individual and what I am as a member of society. Something comes together as a matter of responsibility to myself and my own view of the world, and my responsibility to you and your view of the world. And its reconciliation, if it's devoted, if it's committed, is what I think art is. And therefore, art might be the telling of stories. It might be the plowing of a beautiful field. It might be the building of a fine house. It might be the making of a great dinner. Whatever that excellence is something that I do out of my being, for myself, but I do it for you as well. And as long as you and I are reconciled, then I think that's love. And that love is exactly what I think is the basis of art.
It is an acknowledgement of the dual nature of human being. We're alone, we're members of society, and if I can make a devoted statement of that reality, whatever materials I choose, whatever medium I choose, whatever vehicle, whatever genre, that doesn't matter. What matters is the passion of devotion. They think is good, what they think is virtuous. I want to know what they think is truth. And then the entirety of my art, the entirety of my science is to accept their vision of truth, their vision of beauty, to learn how to adjust to their view.
You search for the excellence in a place, and it'll come out and get you. You don't have to know before. It'll come and get you. In Brazil, it came and got us, and it was sacred art. That's what reached out for us. I go to Turkey, I'm talking about rugs and pots. That's really where Turkey was. In Ireland, I'm talking about stories and songs. To me, it's the same thing. That's really where Turkey was. Turkey was in those rugs and pots. Ireland was in those stories and songs. Ireland's glory is verbal.
There was a lot of people travelling on horses' clots and donkeys' clots, and it wasn't very long to get to London.
I was playing to the ship last night through long Seal, and on the top region I was there build my nest, and asleep was
the valleys to see, but the heath is the home of the wild rapparee. Way out on the moors,
get a piece of a skinner to put in the pig, and got the piece of stick or rod, and when he went out the next morning,
that one man could put in during the spring as much sponge as he'd do his household to that in the weather.
I made a choice. I wanted to be right on the border, in the midst of the troubles. And so one of the things that I wanted to learn is how do people endure through violent times, turn my eye away from the kind of things that journalists were interested in, and turn my attention entirely to the people themselves and learn how they endured. So I had a historical quest, which was to understand how everyday people get through history. I had an ethnographic quest. I wanted to really get to know a community very well. I mean, really devote myself for 11 years to a community of 153 people, 3 square miles. Really got to learn it. I had a grant. It wasn't lavish, but it was sufficient, and I could live in a little caravan. No electricity and no running water, no heat. They're rented for £6 a month, and me and my family lived there, and so we were living a walking distance from Ballymonone. I was walking over there all the time, and I just was going door to door. I mean, it's literally what I did. I wasn't asking for leads. I made it my business to knock on every single door in Ballymonone. I didn't have any sense at all of finding an average Ballymonone inhabitant and generalizing from all the inhabitants to that person. Instead, I was frankly looking for excellence. I was frankly looking for the people who, in the terms understood by the people who were there, who were excellent. They had a word for it, star. It sounds like something out of the movie world, but the fact is they talked about stars. And so I had tremendous conversations, and what I was looking for who's a great musician? John Joe McGuire was a flute player, unbelievably great musician. He wasn't like average. He was a person then with different chances would have been playing for some orchestra in a big city somewhere. Hugh Nolan was a person who, with different chances, would have been a professor at Oxford University. I mean, that was the mind he had. He had the mind of a great scholar. And so that was a handy thing for me, because I'm not saying I was a great scholar. I would say Hugh Nolan was a great scholar, but we were intellectuals together. Peter Flanagan really was a bona fide mainstream hell-bent artist. He had the artist's personality completely. He was very individual, very idiosyncratic, a little wild, a little bit crazy. Not everybody liked him. I loved him for it. Eventually, I would stay with Peter and his brother Joseph. They had an extra bedroom, and I stayed with them, and they were at the bottom of the economic pile. I mean, didn't own any land. They were farm laborers.
And
I realized people didn't talk about the Troubles. They'd listen to the radio. They knew what was happening. I'd sit in Peter's house and listen to the bombs in Enniskillen. I was twice literally in bombs in Northern Ireland, but it wasn't what we talked about. You didn't have to. You knew all about it. But what they did do is they reflected on the present by talking about the past. And pretty soon, Peter Flanagan and Hugh Nolan and Ellen Cutler were saying to me, you want to know our place, learn our history. So it wasn't folk singing, and it wasn't folk tales, and it wasn't even architecture. It was paying attention to the history of the place as told by the people in the place. And so Hugh Nolan became my guide. He was the great historian. Basically, I just became an apprentice to Hugh Nolan in exactly the same way that he had been an apprentice to Huey McGivney. I might have been an outsider, but from the standpoint of historical knowledge, I wasn't an outsider at all, because I sat hours and hours with Hugh Nolan. And he had a dear friend who was in the hospital dying, named Michael Boyle. And so every visiting hours at night, I would be at Michael Boyle's bedside in the old men's ward in the Erne Hospital. And I recorded everything that Hugh Nolan knew and everything that Michael Boyle knew. For them, history was a matter of place, not time.
History in their minds was not a feature of time. It wasn't in the temporal dimension. It wasn't a thing of chronology. Instead, history to them was the story of places. And place gathered into it the whole idea of history. It seems that they have reversed the general idea of historians. Historians are very worried about dates, because dates put things in temporal sequence, and temporal sequence articulates with an idea of causation. These men's vision was different. They were interested in location, because location was a place in which eternally the spirit of history abided.
Fundamentally, I wanted to write an existential ethnography about existence in Ballymena.